Richard Cox is a man of many facets and talents. He's here as part of the International Art Conclave by the Chandigarh Lalit Kala Akademi. He's a painter, has organized many art residencies, developed many programs for exchange of art between various countries, and Richard will share his artistic journey with us today. Welcome to the Academy, Richard, and welcome to the Art Conclave.
Yes, I'm pleased to be here.
And you are not new to India. You have a long association with India, especially when it comes to art and art exchange. So tell us, starting from there.
Well, it came about because I was a senior officer at the Arts Council, and one of my main responsibilities was to organise visual arts exchanges with other countries. And initially this was in Russia, in the Ukraine and Georgia, and then latterly in Norway and Japan and America. And I was to set up an exchange with Barcelona, but a friend of my advisory panel had recently been to India, and when visiting Rajasthan was taken round and hosted by two artists from the School of Art. And she suggested to me that we might extend the exchange to India, because there was not a great deal of interaction between the two countries at that time, whereas in Barcelona everything was happening. So I arranged to visit Rajasthan with the help of the British Council.
Which was which year, Richard?
This would have been 1993.
Okay.
And Shushma Bahal and Chandrika Grover, who were the senior officers at that time, were immensely helpful. They made the process of meeting and making contact with artist groups and artists very, very helpful. And so in this capacity I visited Jaipur, Udaipur and Jodhpur, and arranged for a series of sites in which our artists could go and work as exchange artists. And it was based on reciprocation. The important thing was that whatever our artists would experience and gain from their visit here, we wanted to duplicate that for artists from India coming to our country. So we set up joint institutions which would host artists in both directions. And we made sure that the funding was commensurate to the place. So, for example, our artists would receive less money because it went further here, right, and the artists who would come to us would receive more money because the cost of living was different. So it was an equal experience, and they would have studios and exhibitions, and they would meet other artists, and they'd have somewhere decent to stay. And the important thing was that in both instances the experiences of the artists energized their practice. It exposed them, in the case of Rajasthan for Welsh artists, to an immensely rich visual culture. Me too.
Right.
Me too, because as a practicing artist myself, I saw, for example, for the first time stepwells, which I knew nothing about. Yes. The first time I went to see Abaneri, Chanbari in Dessau, I thought it was a fantastic architectural aberration. I had no idea there were hundreds of these things. But I photographed it, and it became the beginning of a long series of photographic work I've been doing ever since. And that was because the artists I met and who came over subsequently in the initial exchange took me there because they thought I might be interested, and I was. Yes. And of course, when they arrived in the UK, we took them to London to see the Tate and the National Gallery and the Hayward Gallery, and that was good for them. So we tried to make sure that the artists in both instances had a rich and invigorating experience. And over a period of 5 years, which was the official exchange, 36 artists took part. And I think in all but 2 cases, I think they found it a mesmerizing experience. And me too. Right. Which is why I've been coming back ever since.
Really? Mm-hmm. Okay. So you've been, is it only Rajasthan that you...
Oh no, I've also been to Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, Haryana, and extensively in Delhi and Gujarat. And I've done some work with the University of Ahmedabad and visited various colleges as an artist. And everywhere I have been, I have met with great generosity. People have taken made every effort to make me feel welcome, to show me around, to give me their time, which I value very much. And had I not made those initial trips, I wouldn't have experienced any of this. And it is interesting to notice how this is different from other visits to other countries. Every country one goes to, you have a different experience, and nearly always I have found people are generous. But in some instances, it goes beyond that. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to think some of my best friends are people who live in India now, because we now have friendship going in some cases about 22 years.
Okay, okay. And how has this developed over the years, Richard? When we talk of artist exchange, is it only painters or no? These are artists from, or do you pick up artists who are established? Or
No. I was more interested in those artists who are making a career, as opposed to those artists who have, if you like, already been proved to be internationally successful.
Right.
It seems to me that those artists who would likely to most gain from an opportunity like this are people who are still in the process of carving their career.
Okay.
And so typically an artist on the exchange program I used to run might be 10 years out of college and might really value the opportunity to work in a different society with a different group of artists, to experience the opportunity of exhibiting abroad.
Okay.
And all of that follows that. And I had a letter back from Alan Rogers, who was the artist in residence in Jodhpur, where he had been in the Maharina's palace in the fortress, which was a residency directly organised with the Maharaja of Jodhpur. And Alan is now a very experienced artist, and he's an organiser and a curator as well now. But at the time he was in Jodhpur, he was still in the process of making that career.
Right. And
he said that going to India was one of the most energising experiences of his life. And that is not an experience that he shares it with many other people. So many other artists who have had that experience have come back feeling that similar feeling.
Okay.
And a lot of these artists now have gone on to other international exchanges. And also, I practice what I preach. For 15 years, I ran the residency programme for the Arts Council, and we set up about 200 residencies. But since leaving, I have done several residencies myself in Japan and America and Norway and France, but particularly in India.
Okay.
And every time I go and work with, for example, Bemis Center for Contemporary Arts in Nebraska, I've made contact with the other artists with whom I'm working, and they have led me in other directions.
Okay.
So exhibitions I have curated since have sometimes featured artists I've worked with directly, who I've met on international exchanges elsewhere.
Okay.
So the whole process is not self-generating, but it allows for those interactions to take place which wouldn't have happened. Had I not been there, I would not have met these people.
True. And how important are these interactions for you as an artist, as yourself, because you're a painter yourself, and how does these exchanges, these symposiums, these residencies, these conclaves, what do they bring to the art world, and what are the new things that you as...
In some instances, there is a direct correlation between what I did and how my work developed. And in other instances, more formative influences have guided the way I work. I mean, in the 60s and 70s, when I was studying, I was particularly interested by formalist painting in America. And artists like Ad Reinhardt and Robert Mangold were very important to me. And I remember going as a student to Paris to meet Robert Morris, who was making installations there, because I wanted to know why. When I got there, he had never been to Paris. He'd sent instructions to technicians who built the work for him. So I found the technicians and I found a translation. I talked to them. Yes. But that was way back. But the interest in that kind of formalism has remained with me. But it is. But other things have impinged and so on. The thing is, very often the motivations or the interests, the ideas, that stand behind what I make are things that are important to me.
Yes.
But if you see the work itself, they are not meant to be illustrations of these influences. They are what contribute to its making. And it seems to me that the work should stand in its own right, and it should be appreciated, or not, as the case may be, without all this extraneous information, even though that stands behind it.
Okay.
To give you an example of what I mean, one of the series of works I shall be briefly showing at the conclave are called the Weapon series. And these are paintings which have wooden bars which stand proud of the surface of the paint. Now, in fact, there is a direct reference here both to Japanese interior architecture, which are to do with the proportion of panels.
Okay.
And the wooden bars, in fact, make a reference to harpoons, because both Japan and Norway are anti-signatories to the Whaling Treaty.
That's
and as a member of Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth, I fundamentally disagree with the hunting of whales. Now, these may be true facts, and they may stand behind some of the motivations as to why I made things the way I did. But I would rather the work was judged purely on its own merits, independent of that information.
Okay.
But one talks about it because this is an occasion where we're trying to explain in some ways what stands behind what we do or why we do it.
Right.
And there are many other interests. And in a much more direct way, after discovering that the first step well I ever saw was in fact one of many, I then started actively seeking them and have come back over several years and spent on each trip perhaps 3 or 4 weeks travelling in mostly Rajasthan and Gujarat, and to a lesser extent in Haryana, systematically documenting wells. And this has developed into a touring exhibition, digital photographic touring exhibition, which has been touring in India and America and the UK ever since. And because photography seems to me the most efficient way of showing this work, it is principally a photographic exhibition.
Okay.
And so there's a direct correlation here between coming to India and seeing these things.
That's right.
Whereas other motivations stand much further back from the surface.
That's right. So when you talk about your own work as a painter, if you could talk a little about some of the series which are close to your heart, and also where did they emerge from, and how did they, as an artist?
Well, there is a long series of paintings which I also refer to, which has the subtitle Jagmandir, which is an island in Udaipur. In Udaipur.
Okay.
And the iconography which characterizes most of these paintings is the use of the chevron. The chevron is a symbol which we find in many cultures, particularly in Africa and South America. And it's a very common symbol. But my particular source of reference happens to be Indian.
Okay.
I associate it with India. A particular doorway in the palace in Jaipur. There's a courtyard with 4 doorways. And one of these doorways, the peacock doorway, has a series of green chevrons on the inside. And it refers back to that. That's what its original source was. But it became something that just developed over a series of paintings over a series of years. And so that iconography has that association for me. But as with the Weapon series, one hopes that the work is successful or not on the basis of the strength of the painting, rather than the fact that it happens to have these resonating references for me.
Right.
I make a separation between what motivates me and what I make, because 90% of the time people who see what I make will know nothing about this.
That's right.
And that's as it should be, I think.
Which is okay with you?
Oh yes, absolutely. Yes,
right,
yes.
right.
I mean, if people want to know, that's fine, but it's not important.
And how has your journey been in the field of art, Richard? Has it, over the years, I'm sure there may have been many changes which have been also influenced by the amount of work you do outside painting?
I've always had to acknowledge that I'm interested in lots of different things. And because that is the case, my work reflects it.
Right.
So, although painting may be the main and central activity, though in recent years photography has had a big part too, there have been several other series of work in which I've engaged. For example, I made for about 5 years a whole series of work which were based on archiving, which was actually a practical solution. It was a problem I experienced, and I found a solution for it. I would always have a studio, and there was a period when I lost my studio, but my work is very large and difficult to store. Thank goodness I'm not a sculptor, it would be much worse. But for 6 months I had a residency in a university, and they gave me one of the studios to work in. But throughout the residency I would have to store the work at the back of the studio. And what I decided was the only way to make space was to reduce what I had. So I started taking some of these very large paintings, and I got a series of boxes, archive boxes, and I gridded up the backs of the paintings to the same size of the boxes, and I cut the paintings up, and then I stuffed them in the boxes and then exhibited them as boxes. So what you would see would be a box this big, and you would see just the edge of the cut up canvases. So you might have in a box this big by this big by this big, 5 paintings 8 feet by 6 feet, reduced to this. I thought the analogy with a floppy disk was quite good at the time. You compress things. I remember going to the Museum of Modern Art in New York and seeing a microchip. There was a frame like this, in the center was a tiny microchip, and it said, "This microchip will do 1 million operations a second." So this notion of compression is fascinating. I mean, if you take a stick from a computer now, you can have half the British Library on it. I don't understand how it works, how this compression doesn't distort everything, but this notion of compression, what I was trying to do was reduce what I had. I recognize in other artists and myself this dilemma we have. We seem to, over many years, and the older you get, the more problematic it becomes, is you produce this work. And although perhaps for the most part it has been exhibited, sometimes several times, if you are not successful in placing it in a collection or selling it or whatever, there comes a point at which you have this work stored and the work has not lost its integrity. It still has an intrinsic value, but it's taking up a large amount of space.
That's right.
What is the answer to that question? You know, what do you do with all this stuff? And in some cases, I have reduced it to archives and exhibit. You could exhibit an entire exhibition in a column this high, because I've taken perhaps 30 drawings and 6 paintings and cut them up and put them into boxes.
Yeah,
it's become something different.
Yeah, it becomes something different.
Yes.
But does it hurt? Does it? You feel you've lost a little bit of?
There are some pieces about which I do feel precious and would wish to maintain, but I think sometimes you have to put sentiments to one side and also not overestimate the value. I mean, it's gratifying to know that a lot of work being in permanent collections, I don't have to worry about it anymore.
True.
But the inability, I mean, there's only so much you can sell, and because I'm not collected by that many people, I still have a lot of work.
That's
but
right.
I've spoken to other friends of mine who have the same dilemma, some of whom are particularly successful and in many collections, they too have the same problem.
Okay.
It's because we make more than we can exhibit or sell. And it's because it's the notion of making which is important to us.
That's right.
We are not making work so it can be sold. We're making work because we find it an important process. It fulfills something in us, though I would be hard pressed to explain to you what that is, except that I've lived with it all my life. I mean, at school, I was academically undistinguished. The only reason I think I survived in school was because I was very good at drawing, and I was very good at sports. Those are the only things I was any good at. Everything else, I was just so-so. And at the time I left school, there was a ruling, which no longer exists, which was called exceptional talent, which means that without academic qualifications you could go to art school, which they allowed me to do. And then it wasn't until I got to art school and discovered that I wanted to study it, because I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. If I wanted to do a degree, I had to have academic qualifications. So they allowed me to study academic qualifications at half-time, and half-time work on my art.
Okay.
So I spent 3 years at art school getting enough academic qualifications in order to do a first degree.
This was at art school, Richard?
Sorry?
All this was happening at art school?
Yes, that's right, yes.
Interesting. We don't have anything like that here.
Yes, well, this program, this sort of thing no longer is true in the UK either, but it was then. And I was not the only one. You see, there was about 18 of us who were in the same plight. All of us were passionate about being in art school, but we all of us academically undistinguished.
Okay.
So this group of 20 people stayed together, and we were successful in getting enough qualifications to go on to do a first degree, which I did.
Okay.
And but what I hadn't realised was that until I got to the second college, was that we had two very good tutors. I mean, inspiring people who drove us. And I lived very close to London. So for 3 years, I didn't miss any major exhibition in London. I went to the theatre, I joined folk clubs, I listened to lots of modern music. And by the time I got to my first degree college, I had seen more exhibitions than most of the people who were interviewing me, because of the inspiration of our tutors. And most people had done a single year's foundation course, which is what I was doing effectively for 3 years. And so by the time I started, I was actually effectively a fourth year student.
Okay.
Whereas most of my student colleagues were in their second year. And because I had seen everything in London for that time, I was very well informed about what was current and what was happening.
Right.
And consequently, I had a flying start.
Okay.
And it's very interesting to observe that of the 20 students on that year with myself, who had had the same experience as myself, 19 of them went on to do first degrees and postgraduates, and some of whom I'm still in touch with.
Oh.
But I think it's because we had started off with so little, but had been given this opportunity to develop it over a period of time. That process is now almost completely gone, and the kind of art schools that existed at that time are unrecognisable now, because institutions have all now become universities, and the academic ethos that is associated with university status does not necessarily suit the art school system.
Okay.
And many artists, similar to myself, would not be able to get into art college now because they can't enter it without those academic qualifications, which I didn't have.
Right.
So I feel that was a detrimental move. And I have more or less worked in that system for 40 years.
Yes, you're a teacher also.
Yes, that's right, yes.
Yes.
I for the last 10 years I have been at Cardiff School of Art and Design,
Okay.
which is part of Cardiff Metropolitan University. And in addition to teaching, I was also a gallery director there.
Okay.
And it was a great privilege, in fact, over a period to organise about 60 exhibitions. It was an opportunity to actually provide opportunities for to demonstrate work that I value and I think is worthy of being seen. And rather similar to my attitude towards residencies, which were particularly aimed at artists who were less prestigious, shall we say, I also was able to give exhibitions to artists who I felt had not had enough exposure but deserved it.
Okay.
Because it actually is quite difficult to get an exhibition. There is a breed of curator which I have come across who seem to regard their galleries as personal fiefdoms. So the only exhibitions they will entertain are ones that they personally curate. Whereas if you make an application from outside, very often you won't get very far. But I always found it very interesting to see what would come across my desk.
Okay.
And sometimes they could be genuinely interesting stuff, work I'd never seen before. And it is a bit like this occasion, being here. Some of these artists who I know by reputation, others I have never met before, but I would not have met them had I not come here.
That's right.
And the same was true when I was running the residency program, when I was running the gallery. I would come into contact people I wouldn't otherwise never know. And that's a rich opportunity, and one that I've always found has been very rewarding. When I was working in Bemis Center for Contemporary Arts in Nebraska, one of the artists with whom I worked, a Japanese sculptor, her work was Kumi Yamashita. Her work was stunning.
Okay.
I mean, she was making this piece of work which was just unbelievable. She got a spotlight and she photographed it to the side of the face of one of our colleagues, one of the other artists in residence. And the woman was speaking. She said, I forget what she said, but she said something, right? And Kumi took photographs of this, and then she got cards and she cut templates of the shadow, and 250 of them, and she cut each one so it was fractionally different in such a way that it would be like a cinema film. And then she attached the cards to a wooden pole, and attached the pole to a motor, and then she turned the motor on and got the speed exactly right, and she put a spotlight on it, and she shone the shadow on the wall of this spinning template, and then she synchronized it to what was being said. I mean,
yes. Fascinating.
I am speechless with admiration with the extraordinary skill with which she did this. Anyway, when I organised an exhibition when I was back in Wales, I invited her to be an exhibitor, and she sent me, not this piece, but she sent me 3 portraits which were on rice paper. They were this big, and they were photographic, perfect images of the people in question, one of whom was Samuel Beckett.
Oh.
And I don't know how she did this,
yes,
but she got hold of the credit cards of the 3 people she made, including Samuel Beckett.
Okay.
And by rubbing through the rice paper on the indentations on the credit card, she created pixels which made the portraits.
Oh, wow.
You see, the thing is, if I hadn't been to Bemis, I wouldn't have met Kumi.
No. You're right.
Kumi, by the way, had a streak of white hair, and she was 32 years old, and she had a PhD. And I was in a pub, an American pub, and they had a bottle of my favourite whiskey, Oban, half a bottle. And so I said, I'd like to buy the bottle. And I'm sitting with my colleagues there. And the woman behind the bar said, yes, I'd be happy to, but I'm afraid you can't serve the young lady there, she's underage. I said she's 32 years old and she's got a doctorate. Kumi now teaches at the University of Texas.
Okay.
I've lost touch with her. But anyway, the thing is, Kumi is just one of dozens and dozens of artists of that calibre.
Right.
It's been my privilege to work with. And very, very few artists I've worked with have been a disappointment. You know, they have always given more than I'd ever paid them.
So what strikes you most when you say that, okay, this is the work that I'm going to exhibit, or this is the artist I'm going to invite? As an artist yourself, what is that one thing that completely says...
I think it's mutual respect. One recognises excellent work. If I go to a big exhibition, I can pretty much tell in the first minute or so if I'm going to like the show or not.
Oh.
But you need to spend much longer to confirm that view. And when I see work for or shows, my whatever sympathy I may feel for it, I experience quite. And this can be very different work from my own. Although of course I will warm to work which resonates with me personally, I'm also very interested in work that may be completely different from my own. I have areas where I acknowledge my own lack of expertise and find very difficult. I've always found performance art extremely difficult to assess or to judge. And although when you see a piece of work by Bill Viola, there's no question that you're in the presence of serious work. And I remember seeing a piece at National Gallery, which I just couldn't leave. It was so impressive. But I do find, working in a university where performance art is taught, some of the work by some of the students I find, not memorable. So I would be the first to acknowledge there are areas of expertise in which I claim no strong knowledge, whereas other areas, painting, particularly drawing, I think drawing is absolutely fundamental and seminal skill. And I suspect that some younger students probably appreciate that less because of the extraordinary versatility of digital imagery and computers.
True.
I mean, you won't meet a student without a laptop and an iPad or whatever, and they can be amazingly creative with those things. And of course, I discovered it much later because computers didn't become something I started using until the 90s. So I think a lot of people will lean on digital technology, perhaps at the cost of not understanding that drawing is such an important language. When I first left college, for the first 10 years, I taught on and off life drawing because it teaches you discipline.
Okay.
If you can do an accurate and a measurable drawing of the life model, it teaches you skills you can use right across the board. It's a transferable skill. And I'm sorry that so few art schools seem to think that's as important as we did. Some still teach it, but there was a long period, I think in the 70s, where life drawing was for a while persona non grata, which I think was a mistake. I think the drawing skill, I place it as the number one skill, really. It's also the most demanding.
Okay.
Because my drawing has a lot of range, but part of it is photographic. And because one of my multiple interests, which I will not be demonstrating here at the Conclave, is as a kid I became passionately interested in old American cars. My grandfather was subscribed to the National Geographic, and they used to have these wonderful adverts for Cadillacs. So I used to collect them. I cut them out of the magazine, and I used to do drawings. And it's what took me to America originally. I went to America many times, and whereas other people initially go to art galleries, I'd be going around the car parks looking for old models. And I do photographic drawings of old American cars, which combine with another interest of Japanese architecture. So I've done a whole series of drawings called mobile shrines, which are Cadillacs with shrines on the back of them. And now this sounds improbable, but a great friend of mine, Hideo Furuta, a very, very considerable sculptor who tragically died at 58. He came from Japan to work on a residency program. Great sculptor. He told me that they exist, that my drawings were not, but they may have been a work of my fantasy, but they existed. And he sent me a photograph of a Cadillac with a kind of golden temple shrine built on the back. It was a hearse.
Wow. And
very unlike mine. Mine are based on classical 18th century pavilions. But just the same, it was, so I never would have known that either. And when I was in Japan, I was artist in residence at the University of Hiroshima, and I looked everywhere for one, but I didn't find any. And, but, in Wales, which is where I live, there are 5 World Heritage Sites, 4 of which are castles, and one is a mine. In Kyoto, which I had thought was a small city and is a vast modern city, has 17 World Heritage Sites just in that one city. There was an agreement in the Second World War. The Americans did not bomb Kyoto. Interesting.
Interesting,
yes.
Absolutely.
And only 50 miles from Kyoto is Nara, where there's 14 World Heritage Sites, including the biggest wooden structure in the world, Tojai, which I've done detailed drawings of. And as you approach Tojai, which is an immense wooden structure, you look at the doorway, which is like this big, and then you realise the people standing in front of it are this big. And then on the roof, there's doors which open, and through the doors you can see eyes. Oh. And Tojai contains a Buddha 4 stories high. And then when you go inside the building, it's good luck to walk through a pillar that supports the roof, which is about this big.
Okay. And
after you walk through it, or you crawl through it, they say that is the size of the nostril of the Buddha. And they are earthquake-proof because of the way they're built.
Okay.
But they are lit by candles, so they burn down. And if they burn down, they rebuild them exactly the same. My main reason for going was to see, to go to Isai. Isai is the most sacred shrine in Japan. It's a Shinto shrine. And I think it's every 40 years they rebuild it.
Okay.
It's been rebuilt 80 times since the 11th century. And there are 2 of these buildings, 400 meters apart. And the only person who is allowed to enter the shrine is the emperor. And it's empty. It contains a mirror. And you can't see it because it's behind walls. So when you go to Isai, all you can photograph is the top of the roof. But the grounds have 200 models of it, of lots of different sizes. And the day I went there, it was misty and damp and wet. And I photographed many of the temples, but it was a wonderful thing to see. Japanese traditional architecture is immensely beautiful. The proportions, the materials, the sense of silence. It's very impressive. I've always acknowledged there's this huge paradox in the things that interest me, to be interested in the sublime qualities of Japanese traditional architecture and American Cadillacs.
Yes.
And to combine the 2 things is, I don't know, it's counterintuitive.
So how do these all these influences do they settle somewhere and then translate into your works, be it photography?
In some cases, they just become literal. So I sometimes separate things off. I will say, right, I will have an exhibition which is dedicated only to my interest in American cars. I toured an exhibition for...
You did that?
Yeah, I had a touring exhibition in the 80s called Dreams in Detroit. And it was just about my obsessive interest in American cars. Nothing else. It didn't touch on anything else. And there are other exhibitions which have only featured abstract painting.
Okay.
And the touring exhibition, which concerns stepwells, that only deals with that one subject. But I have had 2 or 3 very mixed exhibitions, which have actually combinations of these different ideas have featured. So a recent exhibition I had 2 years ago called Multiple Practice, the gallery, there were 3 separate galleries. It was one big gallery, but it was divided into 3. And one gallery was showing principally the stepwell series. There was 36 pieces from that series. These are photographs, Richard? They're digital photographs, this sort of size.
Okay. And 36 different stepwells. That's exactly right, yeah. Okay.
And then and some related photography. And then the main gallery, it featured just the large abstract paintings.
Okay.
And the 3rd gallery featured only drawings, of which one wall were the Mobile Shrine series.
Okay.
So there were abstract drawings. So in each part of the gallery, a different aspect of my work. And although one could say perhaps this is the work of 3 different artists, it has always been my hope that the same kind of sensibility or understanding or means of delivery is consistent throughout all the art forms. I think it is for other people to make that judgment as to whether I'm correct in that. But there is a way of doing things, or I have a way of doing things which works within particular sorts of parameters. I'm very fussy about certain things, and certain colours too.
Okay.
The colour Venetian red and Prussian blue are colours I obsessively use, and dark greys and blacks. But I hardly ever use purple or orange, for example.
Okay.
I don't know why. It's just the case. So I hope there is that consistency of the way I deliver work. And certainly there are people who have different forms of my work, but most people tend to collect just one kind.
Right.
They'll only have the cars, or they'll only have the step-well photographs, or they'll only have the abstract work. I don't know. But I'm pleased that anybody buys any of it.
And what are you doing now these days, Richard? You mentioned some project in an airport as well.
Oh no, that was ages ago. That was a commission I did for an airport. No,
okay.
No, my current work is a new series. It's only developed over the last year, and it is partly associated with India. The swastika in Indian culture is a very well-known symbol of good luck. But also it has this horrendous connotation with the Second World War. And I have been using the symbol of the swastika as a formal device. But I'm always a great fan of Mondrian. And it's a bit like Mondrian and the swastika meet on the same paper. So I'm doing a series of very formalistic abstract drawings in Conte. And they're all loosely based on the formation of the swastika, but they are very formalistic, very tight, very square. And for the last year I've been working on that series, and I have 2 shows coming up later this year, and I shall be featuring that series along with other series, because I think most artists prefer to show their most recent work if they can.
That's right.
Because it's what we're involved with at the time, and that is what I will be exhibiting as the main exhibit, but I shall be supporting it with some earlier work.
Okay.
Yeah.
And any art exchange programs that are going on which you are very upbeat about, or anything?
Well, we have very recently done an exchange, and currently I'm involved with a very big touring exhibition which is currently in Hong Kong. And it was previously in, where is it? Sichuan, I think.
Okay.
And then before that it was in Australia. It's one of the things I teach at Cardiff School of Art and Design is artist bookmaking. And this is an immense exhibition about book arts. And each time it goes to a new venue, we invite artists from that region to contribute.
Okay.
So the current exhibition in Hong Kong, which is at a major museum, has got a big contingent of very important Chinese artists who have made these very, very fine books. Unfortunately, they are so valuable, it's going to be difficult to tour some of them. But I'm hoping to bring that exhibition to Jawaharlal Kendri in Jaipur in 2016, because I want it to coincide with the Literature Festival in Jaipur, which has become an important event.
Very, very, yes.
And it seems to me that since this exhibition is a book arts exhibition and literature is about books, that's a nice coincidence of interest. And I hope that the exhibition which I'm organising with Vinay Sharma at the Kala Lalit Academy will jointly be shown at the Academy and at GKK, and that the people who come to the festival will also visit that. So that's what I'm currently involved with. And I'm working with the curator, Mary Husted, who is a Cardiff artist. This started out as a small exhibition which exhibited in Wales, and then it started travelling, and each time it travels it gets bigger. The catalogue is now the size of a telephone directory, and I mean it's heavy.
Right,
It's got 174 pages in it, and but because the show has become so big, we can only tour part of it, and because some of the books are so valuable, we can only exhibit where there are museum facilities. So I am hoping that we may attract an important museum to take it as well. It will be shown in the National Library and National Museum in my own country.
Okay.
But you know, I'm actively looking for other venues which might be interesting to see.
Sounds wonderful.
It's an interesting show.
Yes, and coming to India, that'll be wonderful.
Oh, I hope so. Yes, I hope so.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you
it's
so
pleasure.
much for your time.
Well,
It's
yes,
wonderful speaking to you.
Yeah, you too. Well, thank you.
Thank
again.
you.
It's a pleasure.